Thanks for having me, mate.
Okay, well, it's time to bring in our political panel, and joining us today, Labor Senator Marielle Smith. Marielle's in Adelaide, and Liberal Senator Linda Reynolds joins us from our Perth studios. Welcome to both. There's so many topics that we could discuss if time permits as we are in the pre-budget season. But Marielle Smith, I might start with you around the NDIS and the decision of National Cabinet at the end of last week. We had Kurt Fernley, the NDIA agency chair, on the program a little earlier, saying that there is a sense of fear among participants. I'm wondering if you've had similar feedback since the announcement was made about the targeting of costs by those leaders.
Yeah, look, I can certainly understand that perspective, Greg. I mean, the NDIS is extremely important to people with a disability, and we know that over the years it hasn't always worked for people with a disability the way it should. But I do just want to say this is by definition about growth. It's a growth target, it's not a cut. And we do need to do some things within the NDIS to make sure it is working better for people. In addition to this, I mean, we know there's significant rorting within the scheme. That doesn't meet community expectations. It certainly doesn't meet the expectations of people with a disability. So there's a lot to do within the scheme to improve it and strengthen it, but this still is about growth. We're not talking about cuts here.
All right. Linda Reynolds, is there broad agreement across both major political parties here on the need to at least try and target or contain cost growth on the scheme?
Well, Greg, any government-funded, taxpayer-funded scheme has to be affordable and it has to be manageable. And the way the trajectory of the NDIS is going, it is neither. I was the Minister for the NDIS before the last election, and can I just say I think that Bill Shorten is still very much acting like he's in opposition as a shadow minister. He did everything he could to deny there was a problem before the election. If you remember, he kept saying, you know, that we were overhyping things, we were lying, there wasn't a sustainability issue. And now he's inherited the problems that he created when the scheme was set up. So one thing that is bipartisan is that all sides of Parliament agree that this is a brilliant scheme, and it is something that was well overdue and should be supported. But Greg, there's only two things that will save this scheme, and I said this as a minister, and I've been saying it since. The first one is that the intergovernmental agreements with states and territories all have to be renegotiated and not just tinkering around the edges.
Back to what, 50-50 split or thereabouts?
50-50 split, but also to make sure that any cost overrun is equally shared as well. So that's the first thing. The second thing that will save the scheme is legislative change so that the federal government can manage the scheme like it does with the MBS and the PBS, because while they're demand-driven schemes as well, the government can control the two levers of cost. That's, you know, the amount of people who access the scheme and also the average cost per scheme. And under the legislation that Bill Shorten introduced just before they lost government last time, is to make sure that the federal government couldn't deal with either without the 100% support of every state and territory. So those are the only two things that will save this scheme, and by having endless reviews and finding the same things over and over again, he is unnecessarily putting participants and their families in a great deal of angst, and he is not going to solve the problem.
Well, some of that might have been around the communications. I mean, the way the news came out on Friday was somewhat confusing, Marielle, but
it was very poor.
Sure, okay. Well, looking at the makeup, Marielle Smith, of National Cabinet as it now exists, some of the things Linda's talking about there would on paper be easier to achieve right now, wouldn't they? There's only one, I mean, not that politics comes deeply into this, but there's only one Liberal Premier at the table presently. It sounds like a work in progress for Bill Shorten.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, the former government was in power for a decade and Linda was a minister herself. I mean, she seems quite clear on solutions which she didn't implement or introduce herself. Bill Shorten's very, very passionate about this scheme, about finding good solutions for people with a disability. Labor built this scheme. We're trying to improve it, trying to make sure it works not just for people with disability, but also for the community who has an expectation on what they want to see come out of this scheme, given the significant investment which goes in there from government. The decision around the growth target, that was a decision by National Cabinet, the states and territories working with the Commonwealth, and I welcome more of that cooperation so we can make sure this scheme is really delivering for people.
Yeah, perhaps it's a foretaste of a joint approach that might be further pursued. Why don't we move over to defence? And Linda Reynolds, you more than any of us is familiar with this. The idea that Australia might recruit foreigners effectively, pretty well-known foreigners in the sense that the suggestion is from Southwest Pacific Island nations or New Zealand to join the ADF. It seems extreme and unusual based on the way we've been doing things. Is its time here?
Look, I think we do need to do things differently. These problems are not new, either in the Defence Force, in defence industry, or now in our nation more widely. I'd say hasten with caution in this area, because the last thing we want to do is poach service personnel, but also defence industry specialists from any of our Five Eyes partners or beyond, because they also need them. So for AUKUS to work, we have to be very careful that all three nations actually develop our workforce and all three grow. So
you might need to talk to Andrew Hastie about that, Linda.
No, I know exactly what Andrew has been saying, but he's also exercising caution, because we need to make sure that we deal with foreign interference and national security issues. So my preference would be, first of all, as is Andrew's, is to make sure we do more to recruit Australians, but we do more to retain those that we have trained, to make sure that it's more desirable for them to stay. We make it more desirable for their families as well. So that's the first thing. I'd first of all look at our Anzac brothers and sisters, but again, as you've heard from Jackie Lambie, they've got their own recruiting problems. So it is certainly worth having a look at, but we have to make sure we're growing the total pie amongst our allies and not just robbing them to look after ourselves.
Well, as you'd be aware there in your home state, Marielle, it's not just the uniformed ADF which is going to need to find people somehow, somewhere. There's also the defence industry side of it, of course, with all those jobs in engineering and construction still to come. But what is your idea, Marielle, on, recruiting foreigners into the ADF specifically?
Yeah, look, the workforce is a challenge, Greg. You've certainly identified some of the challenges there, and the government doesn't shy away from that reality. There's a few problems with this policy idea just on the face of it that I can see in terms of the national security implications of it, but also, as Linda said, the implications for those countries which, potentially would be providing the workforce. There are significant implications for them. What the government's doing at the moment, I mean, there's more work to do on workforce. In my state of South Australia, we're investing in the academy to support upskilling for these jobs, also investing significantly in TAFE places. And there are some amazing opportunities coming down the line for workers in South Australia to retrain or upskill and to take advantage of these jobs, whether that's in the ADF or whether that's in surrounding industries. So I see, there's an upskilling task here, but there's also a tremendous opportunity for the state of South Australia because of it.
Yeah, all right. Well, look, there's a long list of pre-budget and political questions I could put to you, but as two prominent women in the parliament, I thought we might just kick off or kick out quietly at the end here, Marielle and Linda, with the change in the AFL leadership. Gillan McLachlan's replacement, we learn, will be Andrew Dillon. We also know that there was a female candidate in the final list of shortlisted candidates. To you first, Marielle, is that a missed opportunity, or do you all the same welcome Andrew Dillon's appointment?
First of all, Greg, I think I said to you before when you asked me sports questions, I'm a book sports, not ball sports.
I should have remembered that, yeah.
But no, look, I want to see more women in leadership positions right across our country. And we actually know in the private sector in particular, representation's going backwards, whether it's in CEOs or board appointments. And if you believe, as I do, that merit is equally distributed across the sexes, then clearly there's something going on here. Having more women in leadership positions is not just good for equality, it's also good for business. We're trying to lead by example at the federal government level, and while this is a decision for the AFL, and I'll admit not a detailed decision I know much about,
Sure.
I would just say more broadly, we do need more women into these positions because diversity brings strength to businesses, it brings different opportunities, and I really want to see more women get those opportunities to succeed and lead.
Noted, Marielle. And quickly, Linda, any observations that you'd share about the leadership at the AFL going forward?
Look, first of all, I'd welcome and I congratulate Andrew Dillon on his appointment. It's clearly a very good appointment. But I also think that there were many suitable women who could have been on the selection panel. And I think the AFL, while they have made strides in terms of gender issues, I think they'd be the first to admit that they've still got quite a long way to go. So, I wish him well. It is a big job, an important job for those Aussies who love their footy. But it's a shame that they didn't take the opportunity to get, one of the many well-qualified women into the position.
There you go, noted. And yeah, we don't want to be accused of being solely a politics show. We deal with all comers in national affairs here, so thanks both for taking that one on at the end. Marielle Smith, Linda Reynolds, thanks both for joining us once again. Talk soon.
Thanks, Greg.
All right, well,